Hello there. Happy Friday, July 15th, the second to last full week here of daily episodes on the Locked On Penguins podcast. For today's episode, we're going to get into part of Dejan Kovacevic's report about why Jim Rutherford actually resigned. We finally have at least one answer as to why he suddenly left a little over a year ago. It's been, well, I shouldn't say a little over a year ago. It's been well over a year after, of course, Ron Hextall took over. It was just such a sudden resignation. And, at least according to DK, he finally has his reasons. So I'm going to get into that and talk about that for a segment. Also get into some other notes from that article, Penguin related, including one on Danny Heinen and why it was pretty crazy what he was searching for in arbitration. Also get to a couple of notes from the 32 Thoughts podcast of the Penguins and what Elliot Friedman will talk about with regards to the Malkin negotiation, what led to that finally happening. And then an interesting nugget at the end when it comes to a potential trade that almost happened at the draft. So that's what's coming up for today's episode of the podcast. Without further ado, let's get right on into it.
You're Locked On Penguins, your daily podcast on the Pittsburgh Penguins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, welcome back to another episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I am your host, Hunter Hodes. Remember to follow me on Twitter at Hunter Hodes. You can also follow the show's Twitter at LO_Penguins. And of course, thank you all so much for making this your first listen of the day. It's been basically 2 full months since the Penguins got eliminated in Game 7 by the New York Rangers. This month so far, the listenership up 30% exactly, I should say, over last month. From the bottom of my heart, thank you all so much for continuing to listen to and support this podcast, even though the next game that will be played is about 3 months from now. So, we have a long time and a lot of content to get into before the Penguins officially play their first game of the 2022-2023 season. But let's get into this first topic. So Dejan Kovacevic, I actually got a little bit of a tip from someone that this was going to be coming on Friday, about a few days ago. And so I was looking forward to it. It was one of the first things I read this morning. And this is what DK writes when it comes to why Jim Rutherford resigned. There's just been so much speculation. Here we go. So he said, according to a team source with whom I spoke with at the NHL Draft, it was as simple as this. 2 weeks into the COVID-19 shortened 2021 regular season. So that would be 2020, 2021, I believe is that one. I think so. Wait, no. Excuse me. Pardon me on that. No, I think so. I believe that would be the 2021 season, unless I'm just like being really stupid right now. Yeah. That was the one. I'm sorry. It's been a long 2 years here, people. I've like just been losing my mind. Sorry. It's not 2019-20. It is 2020, excuse me, because Ron Hextall obviously was hired last year. Sorry about that. He says, Rutherford was set to make a move. He was rejected by David Morehouse, the team's president and CEO at the time. Rutherford was livid, and according to this source, he said some things to him that aren't the kind of things you can take back. Further talks between the two over the following 2 days did not settle anything. Rutherford informed Morehouse that he would be resigning, and all concerned agreed not to discuss the matter publicly, which neither of them, by the way, have done, as DK writes. I guess the stuff that you can't take back. I mean, I don't know if he told him to go F himself. Like, he just like cussed him out for 5 to 10 minutes. I have no clue. I got to imagine it involved some form of cussing. And DK goes on to write, as for what the move might have been, the only specific thing I have ever been told from inside the organization, it was not a Kris Letang trade. I'm sure some of you all might remember this. That was a wild rumor going around at the time. I think it was someone from 93.7 The Fan was saying that he was told that Rutherford was trying to trade Letang. And that put everyone into frenzy, like, whoa, glad he resigned and all that. But that was I think a couple days later, that was denied. And then Dejan just now denied it too. So it sounds like it was not a Kris Letang trade. He said, I've also heard that it was not a trade at all. So that is interesting. Rutherford wants to make a move, but it's not a trade. Did he want to sign someone? Like, I mean, I don't think I think Evander Kane was the only league. I mean, did he want to sign Evander Kane or something like that, despite all that baggage he has? Did he want to fire Mike Sullivan? Because I remember that, they did start out the season a little rough for 2021, 2022 before, they really picked it up, down the stretch, especially in March when they had that big win over the Flyers in mid-March. And after that, they were just steamrolling a lot of their teams in the division. I don't know if he would fire Mike Sullivan, but, I think it's a pretty good guess. I don't know like what the move would have been. Did he want to fire like an assistant general manager or something, like someone else below him? I don't know. Did he? If it's not a trade, it can only be, so many things. Bringing someone who has baggage, firing a two-time Stanley Cup winning coach, firing an assistant general manager, something like that. But the fact that someone like Morehouse had to deny him, that's definitely big, to say the least, and something that it sounds like to me maybe that it could have been a little controversial. And DK also writes, as for what specific words might have been spoken, I've not heard a syllable. I do know that once it happened, both were eager to make the cleanest, least controversial exit possible under the odd circumstance, and to their credit, they've held that to even now. He also says, after that, Morehouse and Lemieux created a new position of president of hockey operations and chose Brian Burke. Basically, he says they wanted to avoid any future situation in which a non-hockey executive held authority over a hockey GM. That makes sense. Morehouse, everyone knows he did not come from a hockey background. He was from a very political background. He's from Pittsburgh, and he grew up cheering for the Penguins. But in terms of like working in hockey, he basically had next to no experience. So I think he was, Mario was just doing him a favor since he loved the team so long, and he'd been in a lot of business politics and all that stuff, so that he could get involved with the sport. And that's basically it for what DK said. But definitely interesting. I wish I could find out what that. I would love to know what that move was. At least we will also find out that he cussed out Morehouse, basically saying like, you can't tell me to do my job, and probably a whole bunch of cuss words on here that I'm probably I'm not allowed to say. But I wish I could know what that move was, if it's not a trade. It's a coach, player that want a player roster cut, assistant general manager, another assistant coach on the staff, like what would it be? I think that's the big. Or maybe can you even buy out a player during the regular season? I don't. Yeah, I don't think you can, right? Yeah, so it's definitely not that. So what could it be? I think that's a pretty big thing there. But at least we got to the bottom of it a little bit. That's definitely been on my mind. I remember I wrote an article a long time ago for Last Word on Sports saying I think it could be because Rutherford smelled that the future was not bright for this team, and he wanted to dip out early before things got really bad. But the fact that it sounds like it was a pretty heated argument between Morehouse and Rutherford, I guess that's not too surprising. Again, I just would love to know what that move was, to say the least. So that'll do it for this first segment of the podcast. Coming up in the next segment, we're going to get into some of the other news from this Friday Insider article, especially one when it comes to Danton Heinen. But before I get to that, BetOnline.net is your number one source for all of your betting needs and sports info. You can find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's NHL playoffs and Major League Baseball. BetOnline is your continued source for all of your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. And BetOnline.net remains the best spot for all of your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. BetOnline.net is the fastest, easiest way to check on all of your favorite sports and events, including MMA, boxing, and golf. You can head to the website today or use your phone to learn more about the trends in action. That is BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, I'm back here on this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I am your host, Hunter Hodes. Remember to follow me on Twitter at Hunter Hodes. You can also follow the show's Twitter at LO_Penguins. So a couple other things here with regards to the Friday Insider from DK Pittsburgh Sports. He did say this one was interesting about how Malkin was able to sign his contract. He said, I'm told that although Letang and Crosby both communicated with Malkin in the final days before his contract was complete, neither was singularly influential in getting him to change his mind about hitting the NHL's open market. Rather, the most prominent influence came from his wife, Anna Kastarova, as well as other family and friends. I mean, I honestly think everyone played a role. I don't think it's, one specific person that just helped change Gino's mind. I mean, sure, Anna, being his rock and all that, and I'm sure she, helped convince him to stay. But I definitely do think that Sid and Letang, but especially Sid, reached out, texted him, told him to kept his cool, and all that stuff. So I'm not, I mean, I guess what I'm trying to say is, I think, a whole lot of people played a very big role with that. Now, here's one from Taylor Haase in this article that was very interesting. She says, Danton Heinen doesn't have any set salary in bands, and I was told that any number floating around there is simply speculation. Still, his can't believe that he could get as close to $4 million in arbitration had the Penguins qualified him. The Penguins opted to avoid the chance of arbitration with Heinen, but negotiations continue beyond that point, and Heinen remains flexible on salary if the term is right for him with the Penguins. So there you all go. So many people were, and this was, and I'll say this, at the time, when I saw it, I was like, oh, this doesn't make any sense. Why is he not getting a qualifying offer? I was then reminded by a couple of people that he does have our rights. I thought he didn't because he's been in the league, for several seasons now. I did not think he had that at this time, but I was wrong. I'll take the L on that. But now that, with what Taylor wrote is out there, it makes sense. I don't think Danton Heinen should get close to $4 million for a 1 to 2 year salary, or I believe it's 1 year. For arbitration. That would be ridiculous. For someone who just set a career high in goals with 18, do you really think he's going to do that again next year, making almost $4 million? Probably not, right? I think the Penguins, they were right to make the decision that they did for not qualifying Heinen. You can probably get him, I guess what, 2 to 2.5 million, something like that. I don't think I even think 3 million would be a little much for me. I think he is someone that I would definitely be intrigued about bringing back. He's still on the open market. I'm sure he's, heard from other teams. Remember, the Penguins, they signed Heinen. I want to say that was like a day or two after, the main free agent frenzy day. So, he's going to bide his time like he was last year, and see if another team could potentially give him a shot, whether it's on the second or third line. But, I do like Heinen, 18 goals. It's definitely, got to replace those somehow, some way. The Penguins, they have not done that so far. And, if they do, bring him back, I won't be mad about it, but, I'll have to see, if the term and the salary is right, to say the least. And Taylor also says, yeah, I mean, everyone knows that there is tampering in free agency. You always hear this during every free agent frenzy. Well, teams are gonna file a suit or something, and they're gonna file a formal complaint and all this stuff. I'm like, this happens. It's like this just feels like such a. Is that even a good comparison to say? I don't know. I'm probably not going to put it out there because it's probably a dumb thing. But, everyone basically does it. You can't stop it. Teams 100% start talking to other players, at least I would say a week before free agent frenzy opens. If it's not a week, it's probably 3 to 4 days or something like that. But I would say it's probably at least a week. At that point. And Danny Shirey also had an interesting report here. So I think this is one of the last things I'm going to get into here for this segment. He says the Penguins have way too many defensemen. One, if not more, will be traded, but don't expect one of them to be Brian Dumoulin. If you did not listen to my episode on Thursday, I am of the opinion, I made a bold prediction that I think you're going to see 2 defensemen off this team heading into the regular season. I think one of them could be traded for futures. I think another one could and should be traded for a top 6 to top 9 winger. I think if, and even if I think if you trade just one of the defensemen, if you're not getting a forward back, and this team is definitely lacking at least one right now, especially when you look at the top 6, I think you are doing it wrong. If it's one, I don't want futures in return for him. If you're doing 2, I'll accept that because I think that's a bit better. But I think if you're doing 1, you got to get a decent forward back that, that can finish their chances, because the Penguins, they ranked in the bottom third of the league last year in terms of finishing. I want to see that turned around, to say the least, next year. And Danny goes on to say, I was told management has concerns about his performance, especially now that he's coming back from another significant lower body injury. What concerns them more, though, is the lack of a viable partner for Letang in his absence. Dumoulin does have one season left remaining on his contract, and it appears to me that the Penguins are going to ride it out. So, my thoughts on that, I get why they want to do it. Could they get a big package, I think, back from him? Yes. Teams are always willing to pay for that kind of defenseman. Look at what Eric Goodbranson just got on the open market, 4 times 4. Nick Leddy also just got basically that same contract in St. Louis. Teams value defensemen differently, but the fact that, those two players who are significantly worse than someone like Brian Dumoulin are getting, that kind of money, you can definitely bait a sucker into giving you at least a couple of picks back, or potentially a roster player in return, hopefully a finisher. In my opinion, I think he should be the one to get traded. But, I think management also brings up a nice devil's advocate that, if you do trade him, who is playing up there with him? With Jan Rutta, he's a righty. Is Sullivan comfortable with righty on that top pairing, even though, Rutta did a good job with Hedman down in Tampa Bay. But the thing with that is Hedman's a lefty and Rutta was a righty. So I think John Cooper was much more comfortable with that down there. Are you going to elevate Mike Matheson up to that role? I think that's a little much. We saw how that was in the playoffs when Dumoulin was out, and, I know Dumoulin, some people probably didn't notice him as much. I think part of me didn't, but I think part of me did at times when you saw 3 to 5 pucks basically go off Matheson's skate and in. So, is Brian Dumoulin in that exact same spot during those times? I would probably wager not. You never know. But again, my betting money would be saying that he would not be. I don't think, I don't think you're going to elevate Marcus Pettersson if he's not even on that team. At that point, I think that would be a very dumb move. POJ, we've seen Joseph up with Letang and he looked decent, but the underlying numbers were not kind. They only had like 45% of the shot attempts, like not even 50% of the scoring chances. Joseph was just playing too many minutes, and that was last season when the Penguins were dealing with some injuries to the blue line. Not this past season, but the shortened season before that, I should clarify. So I think Joseph is ready for NHL minutes, but I don't think he's ready for top pairing minutes, to say the least. You look at the other options down there. I mean, you're not going to move John Marino to the left side. Mark Friedman, I mean, he's a righty, but plays on the left side. Is he going to go up there and play top pairing minutes? Probably not. I do think if you had to move Dumoulin, you'd almost have to bring someone else in, but that also wouldn't make any sense because you have 9 defensemen on your roster right now. Trevor Rito's not going to play up there anywhere. So, I definitely understand the devil's advocate to it. I think they respect Dumoulin enough that they think or hope that he can have a bounce back season next year. I'm definitely hoping that he can. I hope that he proves me wrong. But, the back of my mind, it's just like, he hasn't been the same since that ankle injury that, he suffered a few years ago. His skating has taken a massive hit. His defensive breakdowns in his own zone are coming up, I think, a lot more lately. He just hasn't been that same player. So, it sounds like, based on, what a lot of people are, saying in Penguins land and, reporting on DK Pittsburgh Sports and other places, and I think Yoey had that same report on The Athletic. It sounds like it's going to be one of Marcus Pettersson or John Marino, if not both. Or on it again, that's been my bold prediction since yesterday. So, we'll have to see on that. Coming up here in the next segment, we're going to get into Elliot Friedman's a couple of nuggets that he had on 32 Thoughts. There was really nothing else in this article. Those are the main points that I want to touch on for this segment and give my thoughts on those to, talk about that heading into the weekend here. So I'm going to touch on the stuff from Elliot Friedman's 32 Thoughts podcast when he talked about the Penguins. One of them involves Danny Malkin. The other one involves a potential trade that looked like it fell apart towards the end of it. So stick around for that coming up here in this final segment. All right, I'm back here on this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I am your host, Hunter Hodes. Remember to follow me on Twitter at Hunter Hodes. Follow the show's Twitter at LO_Penguins. So, Friedman and Merrick, they dropped the final 32 Thoughts podcast today. If you do not listen to that podcast, I implore you to do it. I think it's probably the best hockey podcast out there. I toot my horn enough. I think I offer quite a bit on this show. I definitely love talking about this team with you all, but in terms of how they do it with Amo as a production person, I would love to have someone like that for this. I will say that I'm like decent with that kind of stuff when I was back in college, but with how he does it, mixing stuff in, I would love to have someone like that that I could just rely on for those kind of sounds. So they did a great job. Hope they have a great summer. But Friedman, he touched on the Malkin negotiation, and he said he was told the biggest thing was getting Malkin cooled down. And I'm tooting my own horn a little bit here, but that was something that Josh Yowie and I talked about a lot on my episode on Tuesday, where it was like, yeah, like if they can just if Malkin can just settle down. We all know he's an emotional guy, especially on the ice. We all saw that towards the late stage of the regular season when he lost his mind on one of the Nashville Predators players when he just made a stupid play and just cross-checked him to the face and was suspended 4 games, just stuff you can't do. He's also like that off the ice. And, cooler heads did prevail. Friedman said they started working on it Tuesday afternoon, and by the evening it was done. And, he also said that the team – they felt like they offered a 4-year term. And Malkin apparently said at the time when he was testing free agency that he thought it was too late. And, it's basically because he was ridiculously emotional. But, that's who Gino is. He's been that way for 16 years. He is not going to change, to say the least. But he also did say that, Sid he heard that did play a role, and a lot of other people did, to make sure that this was going to happen. And apparently this was an interesting topic that he discussed. He said that teams were lining up to give him a short-term 1-year deal, low AAV, but easily attainable bonuses so that he can make potentially, up to 8, maybe 8.5, even 9 million for a season. So, for example, he was maybe going to have an AAV at like 2 or 3 million for the season, but have very easy bonuses to get, where again, he could get up to, 7, 8, 9 million. And, I think a lot of contenders, they would be, for some of the teams that I'd be thinking of, Colorado, Florida, obviously he has a residence down there where he trains during the off season. The Rangers obviously are out there, the Washington Capitals, they signed Dylan Strome, which was, I thought, a great move by them. All these, I think I saw Dallas was thrown around, even though they're not a contender, but, teams, even though they were maybe not crazy about term for Malkin, they were apparently lining up to give him a short AAV with easy bonuses. And, I think that would have been a really, if Malkin had gotten to free agency, I think that probably would have been enough to have him leave. I think even if the Penguins offered him that contract, I'm not really sure if he would take it, to be honest. So the Penguins, I definitely think they dodged a bullet there by him not getting to free agency. Thank God they locked him up at the 11th hour. Malkin was able to circle back and able to make that deal. And then Friedman said when they were talking about the Jan Ruda signing, he said what he was told at the draft, the Penguins did have a trade for a defenseman to be shipped out, and it looked like it was about to happen before it fell apart at the last second. So I'm curious to see who that was. I think Friedman went on Vancouver radio yesterday, Thursday. So maybe you all might be listening to this on Saturday. I'm recording this late on Friday night, but I believe it was on Thursday. And he was talking to them about Marino because, all the Vancouver fans just want him at this point. And he said, I think that was the first time where he mentioned it. He's like, yeah, they felt like he almost got moved last week, but it fell apart. And to me, my pure speculation was that the trade that was going to go for the number 7 overall pick. That is my big question on that before maybe Ottawa pivoted to DeBrincat. Maybe it also lines up with the Jeff Petrie report that DK had on his side. Maybe was Marino going the other way and Petrie was coming back and Montreal was eating half that salary. Maybe if that works, I know Montreal doesn't have a lot of cap space, and maybe that works. Maybe it doesn't have to go on Cap Friendly and check that out. But maybe that was it. Who knows? But it's interesting. It's definitely something that they're close to potentially making this move. I know Josh Yowie said on Wednesday that the Penguins have been trying to make a trade all day. No one was budging. They are eventually going to make this move. a team is going to be out there that needs help on their back end, and they're going to, hopefully give up a decent score to get the player, or, it's going to be futures or something like that, but, preferably a player. And the Penguins are either going to have 8 defensemen next season, or they're going to have 7. But, the fact that Hextall was being aggressive at the draft shows, I think that he wants to get this done sooner rather than later. Would not be surprised if you see a move here, looking at the date here, in the next week or two, I guess. And then as for the Johan Larsson stuff, no word on that today. Very quiet day in free agency. It's been super quiet, I should say, since Wednesday. I think you're really feeling the lack of money this year due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Last year, you had Seattle and, $80 million worth of, revenue and, all this money of revenue coming in, and, teams were able to spend some money. But this year, you don't got an expansion team coming in. Seeing a lot of teams, I think a little bit scared to pay up for some of these players because they just don't have a lot of salary cap space. And I don't think a lot of other teams are looking to take on salary at this point. There's still a lot of really good players out there. So, we'll have to see what happens here potentially over the weekend, next week, and all that. But that will do it for this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I really appreciate all of you listening to this one. Remember, next week is the final full week of episodes before we go down to 3 weeks. I can't thank you all enough for continuing to make the Locked On Penguins podcast hopefully your first listen of the day. I'll be back on Monday. Hope you all have a wonderful mid-July summer weekend. Talk to you on Monday.